I did not wake up that morning expecting to fire anyone. I certainly did not expect a single mother to storm into my building, tears still drying on her cheeks, her hands trembling as she clutched a file to her chest. And I definitely did not expect her to speak to me, the most feared CEO in Accra Tech Holdings, as if I were an ordinary man. But that was exactly how the day began. My name is Kwame Arma, and for the last 12 years, I have lived and breathed the company I built with my own hands. No wife. No children. No distractions. Only work. Only results. People say I have no heart. Others say I buried it after my mother died. Maybe both are true. Either way, I am not the sort of man who becomes sentimental over strangers. At least, not until the morning I met Amanyarko. The confrontation. It was a little past 8 a.m. when my elevator doors slid open on the ground floor. I had arrived early expecting silence. Instead, I walked straight into chaos. 2 security guards stood at the reception area, trying to calm a woman who refused to be calmed. She was breathing hard, like she had run all the way here, and her uniform shirt was wrinkled, the buttons slightly mismatched as if she had dressed in a hurry. Her hair was pinned up neatly, though one loose strand kept sliding across her face. "Amma, please," the receptionist begged, "don't make this worse." "I need to speak to Mr. Arma," she cried. "Please. I cannot lose this job. I cannot." I paused mid-step. No one, absolutely no one, calls my name out loud in the lobby. Not unless they want to be removed from the building. One of the guards saw me and straightened instantly. "Sir." "Good morning, sir." And just like that, the woman turned. Her eyes landed on me. I expected fear. Or at least a nervous apology. But what I got instead was raw, burning desperation. "Please," she said, her voice faint. "Please, hear me. I was late today, I know. But I had a reason." I glanced at the guards. "Who is she?" The older guard cleared his throat. "Sir, this is Amanyarko, administrative assistant on the 3rd floor. She came late for the 3rd time this month. HR sent a termination notice. She refused to sign." Amma stepped forward. "Because it is unfair." I raised a brow. No one ever told me my decisions were unfair. No one dared. "You were late," I said. 3 times. "Our policy is clear." "But I wasn't careless," she shot back. "I wasn't irresponsible. I was helping someone. A stranger. An old woman who fell by the roadside. I couldn't leave her there." Her chest heaved. Tears clung to her lower lashes but didn't fall. She was fighting for her dignity. I hate tears. I hate emotions. But something about this woman's voice. It stirred something I had not felt in years. Still, rules were rules. "You could have called your supervisor," I said. "My phone died," she replied. "I left the house at 4 a.m. to get here early. I didn't expect." Enough. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I'd perfected the art of shutting people down with one word. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling. When she opened them again, her gaze was steady. "Please, sir," she said softly. "Let me explain." The guards looked at me, waiting. Most days I would have told them to escort her out immediately. But something in her voice, the trembling, the sincerity, something made me pause. 5 minutes, I said. The receptionist's mouth fell open. The younger guard stared at me as if I had grown 2 heads. Amma covered her mouth with her hand, shocked. "Thank you, sir." I nodded toward the small conference room near the lobby. Inside. She hurried ahead and I followed, closing the glass door behind us. Her story. Amma stood with her hands folded tightly in front of her. "Sir, I am a single mother of 2. Their father died 2 years ago. I work here because I need stability. I cannot afford daycare every day, but I try. I truly try." Her voice cracked just a little. "I wake up at 4 a.m. every morning so I can prepare them, drop them off at my neighbor's place and catch the early bus. But today," she swallowed. "Today on the road near Kainchi, I saw an old woman collapse. People passed her by like she was nothing. I couldn't. I had to help. So I carried her to a taxi myself and took her to the clinic. I stayed until her daughter arrived." My jaw tightened. Not at her story, but at how familiar that helplessness felt. My own mother had collapsed the day she died. And no one helped her. No one. Amma continued, unaware of the storm brewing in me. "I rushed here afterward, but traffic was bad. And by the time I arrived, HR had already sent the letter." She took a shaky breath. "I know I broke the rule. But I am asking, begging, for one more chance." I looked at her carefully. She wasn't lying. She wasn't manipulating. She wasn't making excuses. She was simply human. And I was beginning to remember that I was, too. But I could not allow emotions to cloud the structure I'd built over a decade. Your supervisor says this is the third time, I said calmly. It is, she admitted. The first time my daughter had an asthma attack. The second, our bus broke down near Kojo. I came running on foot for the last part. Her voice wavered. I am doing my best, sir. My very best. She looked at me with eyes that carried the weight of every morning she had woken up in darkness, every night she had cried quietly so her children would not hear, every battle she had fought alone. But policies are policies. Your reason is noble, I said slowly. But I cannot overturn HR's decision. The moment the words left my mouth, something inside her broke. Just a small crack. But it pierced me sharply. So that's it, she whispered. I help someone, and I lose everything. She nodded to herself, wiping her cheek. Thank you for listening, sir. She turned toward the door. But something inside me, something I couldn't name, stopped me. Wait. She paused. I didn't know why I said it. I wasn't sure what I was about to do. But the idea had begun forming the moment she mentioned the old woman. What is the woman's name? I asked. She blinked. The one I helped? Yes. Her daughter called her Madame Yesai Arthur. Yesai Arthur. My breath stilled. Of all people in Accra. Of all the random strangers. She had helped my board chairman's mother. I leaned back stunned. Amma noticed my expression and frowned. Sir? Did I say something wrong? No, I said quietly. You said something very right. I stood slowly. Amma Nyarko, you may return to work. Her mouth fell open. Sir? Report to your floor, I said. Tell HR I reversed the termination. Her hand flew to her chest. Tears sprang to her eyes. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, she breathed. You don't know what this means. I know, I said softly. Now go. She hurried out of the room, wiping her tears with her sleeve. But I remained standing there, replaying her words. She had no idea who the woman she helped was. No idea her kindness had saved her job. And certainly no idea who I was. The man she helped save, without even knowing. Because Madame Yesai was the only board member who always defended me. The only one who saw me not as a hard CEO, but as someone with a heart buried under responsibility. And Amma. Amma had unknowingly protected the one person who had stood by me for years. I exhaled slowly. This was not the last time I would meet her. Something in me knew that with certainty. Something had shifted. And for the first time in years, I felt it. I cared. I have been called many things in the boardroom, calculating, distant, ice cold. None of those insults ever bothered me. A man cannot build a billion-CD empire by wearing his heart on his sleeve. But that morning, after Amma walked out of the small conference room with trembling relief in her eyes, I found myself standing there, still, unsettled. I'm not a man easily moved. Yet something about her, her voice, her stubborn strength, her quiet dignity, refused to leave my mind. I tried to shake it off. There was work to do, numbers to review, a board meeting to prepare for. Amma, a junior administrative assistant, should not have been lingering in my thoughts. But she was. By the time I reached my office on the 20th floor, my assistant, Daniel, was already waiting with his tablet pressed against his chest. Morning, sir. He hesitated before continuing. HR sent an escalation regarding the reversal you approved. Of course they did. HR loved their procedures. They lived for them. They clung to policies with both hands. What is their complaint? I asked, lowering myself into my leather chair. That reversing a termination without formal review sets a risky precedent, Daniel recited, making air quotes. I rubbed my temple. Draft a response. Already did. He handed me a printed sheet. Short and clear, just how you like it. I read it. HR's responsibility is to ensure fairness. Mine is to ensure humanity. The decision stands. K. Arma. I allowed myself the smallest smile. Daniel understood my style better than anyone. Send it, I said. He nodded and left. But once I was alone, I leaned back in my chair and thought again of Amma. She had helped a stranger, believing she would lose everything for it. She didn't know that stranger had a connection to me. Guilt tugged at me, not because I'd almost let her get fired, but because I had seen too much of myself in her struggle. My mother had raised me alone. I knew the sacrifices single mothers made, the way they broke themselves in half for their children. And here I was, nearly punishing a woman for having my mother's heart. What would my mother have said? I could almost hear her voice. Kwame, don't let success blind you. Remember where you came from. I exhaled long and slow. I remembered. At the board meeting. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and freshly brewed coffee. Men and women in suits murmured quietly until I stepped in. Then, as always, silence fell. That is the power I had earned. But today one seat remained empty. Madame Sighs. Her absence twisted something in me. The meeting began, numbers and projections pouring in. I gave cold, calculated answers, my usual. But my mind drifted. When the meeting ended, I went straight to the hallway and called her daughter. "Good morning, Kojo," I said. She sounded startled. "Mr. Arma." "Good morning, sir. How is your mother?" "She's resting. Thank you for asking." A kind young woman helped her after she fainted. My heart stirred. "Yes," I said quietly. "I heard. She insisted on waiting with us. Even told me she was late for work because of it. I hope she didn't get into trouble." I hesitated. "She didn't," I answered. "Not anymore. Not anymore." My voice held more warmth than I meant. Kojo didn't notice, but I did. "Please send my regards to your mother," I said before hanging up. Later that afternoon, I decided to walk through the administrative floors, something I hadn't done in 3 years. I told myself it was to observe workflow. I told myself it was leadership visibility. But the truth? I wanted to see if she was all right. The third floor was buzzing with activity, phones ringing, printers humming, staff hurrying with files. Then I saw her. Amma sat at her desk in the far corner, typing quickly, her brow slightly furrowed. She had changed into a smoother blouse, probably something she kept in her bag for emergencies. Stock image perfect, I thought strangely, mother juggling life and work. Her colleagues kept glancing at her, whispering. I didn't like that. As I approached, she didn't notice me immediately. She was so focused on her work that she only looked up when the entire floor suddenly went silent. "Sir," her supervisor gasped, jumping to his feet. Amma froze, a pen still in her hand. I saw fear flicker in her eyes. Why did that bother me? "Good afternoon," I said simply. Her supervisor hurried forward. "Sir, we didn't expect." "I'm doing a floor review," I said, cutting him off gently. "Continue your duties." They scattered like startled birds. I turned to Amma. For the first time, I noticed how small her workstation was, just a narrow desk near the window stacked with files. A framed picture of her children sat beside her monitor. A boy around 6, a girl maybe 9. Her pride. Her reason for fighting. "Are you settling back in?" I asked. She swallowed. "Yes, sir. Thank you again for giving me a second chance." Her voice was steady, but her fingers twisted nervously. "You earned it," I said. She blinked. "I did." "Yes." Silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with unspoken things. Then she offered a small smile. First genuine smile I'd seen from her. It did something to me, an unfamiliar pull in my chest. "Thank you, sir," she repeated softly. I nodded, turned, and walked away. But with every step I felt her eyes on my back, and I wondered why I cared. The restless evening. That evening I returned to my penthouse overlooking the Gulf of Guinea. A stunning sunset painted the sky orange and gold, but I barely noticed. I tried to cook. Failed. I tried to read. Failed. Even my nightly workout didn't help. My mind kept replaying the same moments. Her trembling voice. Her strength. Her honesty. Her smile. I had never been married. Never had a serious relationship. I told myself I was too busy, too driven, too focused. But the truth? I had never met anyone who stirred anything in me. Until today. And that terrified me more than I wanted to admit. Around 9 p.m. I stepped onto my balcony and called Daniel. "Sir?" he answered quickly. "Give me the full profile of the administrative staff." Pause. "All of them, sir?" "Yes." Another pause. Then a cautious, "Just for review purposes?" "Yes." "All right, sir. I'll send it in the morning." I hung up. Why did I feel guilty? I wasn't spying. I wasn't crossing any lines. I simply wanted to understand the people working for me. At least that's what I told myself. But deep down I knew exactly what, or who, I really wanted to understand. A knock at the gate. Just when I was settling into bed, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I debated ignoring it, but something nudged me to answer. "Hello." A shaky voice. "Is this Mr. Arma? The CEO?" "Yes." "Who is this?" "This is Amma," she whispered. My heart thudded once, hard. "Are you all right?" My voice came out sharper than intended. I'm so sorry to call you at this hour. I know it is wrong. I know I shouldn't. But I didn't know what else to do. Fear. Real fear. I sat upright. Mama. What happened? It's my son, she choked. Kojo. He's been coughing badly since evening. He can't breathe properly. I don't know what to do. The pharmacies are closed, and the only clinic open now is too far without a car. Where are you? I interrupted. Her breath hitched. Home. In Darkaman. Send me your location. Sir, no, I didn't call for you to come. I only wanted to ask if you knew any 24-hour clinics. I didn't mean to disturb. Amma, I said, standing and grabbing my keys, I'm on my way. But sir? Send. Your location. A beat of silence. Then a whisper. Yes, sir. I hung up and rushed out of the penthouse. I had never driven so fast through the Accra night. Darkaman was quiet when I arrived, street lamps flickering. Amma stood outside a small compound house, dressed in a long wrapper, holding her son wrapped in a blanket. When she saw my car, her eyes widened in disbelief. Sir, you came. Kojo whimpered weakly in her arms. We're losing time, I said. Get in. She hurried into the back seat, holding her son close. I could hear his wheezing from the front. My chest tightened. I drove straight to the private emergency center I used for my staff. It was 20 minutes away, but tonight it felt like forever. When we arrived, doctors rushed toward us. Asthma attack, I said sharply. He needs immediate care. Amma's tears fell freely now. They whisked Kojo away, leaving her shaking in the corridor. She leaned against the wall, covering her face. Amma, I said gently. She dropped her hands and looked at me, vulnerable, terrified, exhausted. I didn't know who else to call, she whispered. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, I said. You did the right thing. Her breath trembled as she nodded. Then slowly, she stepped closer. Not touching me. Not expecting anything. Just needing someone there. Someone steady. Someone who cared. For reasons I didn't yet understand. I stayed. The doctor's news. After 20 minutes, the doctor returned. He's stable now, he said with a reassuring smile. An acute asthma flare-up, but he responded well to treatment. You brought him in just in time. Amma gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. She swayed, her knees almost giving out. I caught her elbow. Easy. Her eyes filled with grateful tears. Thank you, sir, she whispered. I don't know how to repay. You don't need to repay me, I said. You saved someone today. Tonight someone saved your son. That is how life works. Her lips trembled. And in that moment, I realized something with terrifying clarity. This woman was going to change my life. Whether I wanted it or not. I did not understand why I stayed at the hospital that night. I could have left the moment the doctor said Kojo was stable. I could have returned to my penthouse, my quiet, orderly life. That was the kind of man I had always been. Solve the problem, move on, no lingering emotion. But I remained in the dim corridor with Amma, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, the way her hands trembled from shock, fear, and relief all at once. She sat in one of the plastic chairs, her wrapper pulled tightly around her as if trying to hold herself together. I sat a short distance away, legs spread, palms clasped, pretending to focus on the linoleum floor. In truth, I kept stealing glances at her. Each time I did, something unfamiliar tugged at me, a pull that made no sense. A nurse walked past and smiled politely at us. I must have looked out of place there, an impeccably dressed CO sitting in a government emergency wing at midnight. Amma noticed and offered me a faint, exhausted smile. You don't have to stay, sir, she said softly. You've done more than enough. I'll stay until you take him home. She exhaled shakily and turned her face away. A tear slid down her cheek. I pretended not to see it, but my chest tightened painfully. An hour later, the doctor allowed us into the small ward. Kojo was asleep on a narrow bed, an oxygen tube under his nose. He looked so small, so fragile. Amma's entire face softened when she saw him. She touched his forehead gently, her fingers trembling with relief. He looks peaceful, I whispered. She nodded. He hasn't had an attack this bad in months. I thought, her voice cracked. I thought I would lose him tonight. You didn't, I said. You acted fast. She turned to me. Her eyes, tired red but still shining, held mine. Because you came. I swallowed. Compliments never sat well with me, and her gratitude felt too raw, too intimate. Anyone would have helped. No, she whispered. Not anyone. Silence settled between us again, but something about it was warm. Not awkward, not tense. Just two people sharing the quiet air after surviving something frightening. When Kojo stirred, she immediately moved closer, humming a lullaby under her breath. I watched her, struck by how gentle she was. How much strength was hidden in that gentleness. Most people crumble under pressure. Amma simply bent, then straightened again, carrying burdens alone with no room to fall apart. I thought of my mother, running a small provisions shop, working from dawn until late night to keep us alive. She had the same softness, the same quiet fierceness. The resemblance pressed on me like a hand over my heart. It was past 1 a.m. when Kojo finally opened his eyes. Amma leaned closer. "Baby, how do you feel?" He blinked slowly, confused. Then he saw the oxygen tube and frowned. "Mommy? I'm in the hospital?" "You had trouble breathing," she murmured, stroking his arm. His eyes drifted to me. "Who's that man?" Amma looked flustered. He's my boss." I smiled gently. "Hello, Kojo." He stared for a few seconds, still groggy. "You look like the man on Mommy's office wall." Amma's cheeks turned bright red. "Kojo." I chuckled. "It's all right." Kojo sank back into the pillow, reassured by his mother's touch. Within minutes, he drifted off again. Amma exhaled. "He needs rest. They'll discharge him by morning. I'll take you home." "No, sir, you've already done too much." "I insist." She looked torn, grateful but afraid of imposing. I understood that kind of pride. The pride of someone who had suffered enough to learn not to depend on others. But I didn't give her a choice. And I didn't fully understand why. Around 4 a.m., Kojo was discharged with a bag of medications and instructions. Amma carried him on her hip as we walked through the hospital parking lot. Her body swayed slightly with exhaustion. I opened the car door for her, and she whispered another thank you under her breath. As we drove through the quiet Accra streets, the city still asleep, she watched her son in the back seat. Every few minutes she checked if he was breathing normally. "Mothers don't sleep, do they?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Not when their children need them." I nodded. My mother was the same. She turned to me gently. "You were close." "Yes." My voice came out tighter than intended. "I lost her too early. It changed everything." "I'm sorry," she murmured. I didn't respond. The memories were too heavy to unwrap tonight. When we finally reached her compound house in Darkaman, the sky was turning a pale shade of blue. She stepped out, adjusting Kojo on her hip. I followed her to the door. "Thank you, sir," she said again, her voice incredibly soft. "I know you're a busy man. You didn't have to do all this." "I did it because I wanted to." Her eyes lifted to mine. Confused, surprised, maybe even a little afraid of what those words might mean. I cleared my throat. "Make sure he rests. And call me if anything changes." She hesitated. "Sir, may I ask something?" "Yes." "Why were you so kind today?" The question hit me like a punch, not because I couldn't answer but because her tone was so honest. As if she had spent too long in a world where kindness was rare. I looked down at her, at the tired eyes, the worn wrapper, the swollen feet from standing for too many hours, the strength that had carried her through another impossible night. "There are some things," I said slowly, "that remind a man of who he used to be. And who he should be." Her lips parted slightly. She looked away before her eyes grew too emotional. "Good night, sir." "Good night, Amma." I walked back to my car but I didn't drive off. Not yet. I watched her carry Kojo inside. Only when the door closed did I exhale and rest my forehead briefly on the steering wheel. What was I doing? Why did it feel like the axis of my world had shifted by a few degrees? Just enough to throw me off balance, yet not enough to understand. I returned home as the first light washed over the city. I should have slept, but instead I stood by the window, staring at the horizon. The night had left something inside me, an imprint of Amma's tears, her strength, her fear, her gratitude. I wasn't used to having someone else's emotions filling my chest like this. It was unsettling. But beneath the unease was something else, something warm, frightening, and new. The next morning I arrived at the office late for the first time in years. Daniel stared at me in shock as I stepped out of the elevator. "Sir, good morning. Are you all right?" I ignored the question. "Cancel my meetings before noon." "But sir." I said cancel them. He swallowed and nodded quickly. I didn't explain myself. How could I? I barely understood it myself. I tried to work. I failed. I tried to focus on a contract. Failed. On the window's reflection, I saw not a CEO, not a billionaire, not the man the city feared. I saw someone who had spent one night caring about a woman and her child more than he cared about the entire company. Someone restless. Someone changed. Around 11 a.m. I finally gave in. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over her number longer than necessary. Then I pressed call. She answered on the second ring, her voice still tired, still soft. "Hello. It's me," I said. "How's Kojo?" "He's sleeping," she whispered. "Breathing much better." "That's good." There was a long pause, too long. Heavy with everything neither of us knew how to say. Then, before she could speak again, the words escaped my mouth. "Amma, can I see you today?" She inhaled sharply. And I didn't know which one of us was more afraid of what her answer might reveal. The moment his feet touched the ground outside the apartment, he felt the weight of everything he had been avoiding pressing onto his shoulders at once. The night air in Accra had cooled, but inside him everything felt feverish, restless, unsettled. He didn't go straight to the car. He just stood there for a moment, hands hanging uselessly by his sides, trying to breathe steadily. He knew he couldn't go back upstairs. Not yet. Not with everything swirling in his head like a storm that refused to settle. He walked instead. Down the quiet street, past the small shop that had closed an hour ago, past the street light that flickered like it was tired of holding itself together. His mind replayed every second of the last conversation. The worry in her voice, the softness in her eyes, the way she tried to hold him together as if her hands alone were enough to protect him from everything he didn't want to admit he was feeling. By the time he reached the corner, he couldn't tell whether he was angry at the world, angry at the circumstances, or angry at himself for not knowing how to handle the mixture of fear and helplessness inside him. He hadn't felt this out of control in years. He didn't like it. It made him feel small, like he was at the mercy of things he couldn't fight. He leaned against the wall near the gate of an empty compound, dropped his head back and let the silence wrap around him. His phone buzzed twice. Messages, probably her checking in, but he couldn't bring himself to look. He didn't want to say something he'd regret. He didn't want to push her away with words he didn't mean but emotions he didn't know how to regulate. He closed his eyes and tried to slow his racing thoughts. For the first time he admitted to himself that he was scared. Not of losing control, but of being seen while he was not put together. He'd always been the one people leaned on. The stable one. The steady one. The one who always had a plan. But tonight he felt like someone who had run out of answers. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. At some point he slid down the wall until he was sitting on the pavement with his knees bent, elbows resting on them. A stray cat crossed the road and paused to look at him like he was the one intruding on its quiet night. He let out a humorless laugh. He didn't understand why caring for someone made everything feel sharper. Every fear, every doubt, every hope, every expectation. He didn't understand how she could stay patient with him despite his mood swings, his silence, his retreats into himself. He didn't understand why she didn't get tired. Why she didn't walk away. His phone buzzed again. And again. This time he forced himself to look. 3 messages from her. "Are you safe? Talk to me. I know you need space but don't disappear." He sighed. A long, heavy sound that came from somewhere deep. He typed back. "I'll come soon." No explanation. No details. Just enough to let her know he wasn't shutting her out completely. When he stood up again he dusted off his trousers and started walking back. His steps weren't faster but they were steadier. He didn't have answers yet, but he knew one thing with certainty. He didn't want distance to be the thing she remembered about this night. He reached the door and hesitated for a few seconds before opening it. She was sitting on the couch, legs pulled up, a blanket around her, eyes fixed on the door like she'd been watching it the entire time. The moment he stepped in she didn't bombard him with questions. She didn't rush at him. She just looked at him with that expression that always disarmed him. Quiet understanding mixed with worry. He sat beside her. Not close enough to touch but not far either. His breathing felt uneven again. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, staring at his hands. "I just needed to breathe." "I know," she whispered. "But you don't have to breathe alone." He winced, not because her words hurt but because they hit too deeply. She moved closer, slowly, giving him time to pull away if he needed to. He didn't. Her hand rested gently on the back of his neck, warm, grounding. "You're allowed to feel overwhelmed," she said softly. "You're not a machine." A small laugh escaped him, cracked and tired. "Sometimes I wish I was." "You don't. You just wish life didn't demand so much from you." He leaned into her touch without realizing he was doing it. His forehead rested against her shoulder, and for the first time that night, his body unclenched. She wrapped both arms around him, holding him like she wasn't afraid of his heaviness. They stayed like that for a long time. No words. Just breathing. Just presence. Just two people trying to figure out how to hold each other in a world that didn't stop moving. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were clearer. Not fixed, not healed, but clearer. "Thank you," he murmured. "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "Just let me be here." He nodded, slow but certain. Something inside him softened. Not the kind of soft that made him weak, but the kind that made him human again. "I'm trying," he said. "I know," she answered. And she really did. He took her hand and held it firmly, not because he needed support at that moment, but because he wanted her to know he wasn't drifting away. He wasn't shutting down. He wasn't leaving her alone in that space of worry she'd been sitting in. "Let's go to bed," she whispered after a moment. "You're tired." He didn't argue. They walked to the bedroom together, slow and quiet. When they lay down, he pulled her closer, held her like she was the anchor he needed but was still learning how to admit he relied on. He didn't sleep immediately. But for the first time that night, he wasn't afraid of the thoughts waiting behind his eyelids. He wasn't alone with them anymore. The next morning arrived slowly, with a pale gold light slipping through the curtains and stretching across the room like it was tiptoeing around their exhaustion. He woke before she did, eyes opening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the faint scent of her hair against his chest. For a few seconds he lay still, his mind blank, his body unusually calm. It felt foreign, this kind of peace. Fragile. Borrowed. Then the memories of last night returned, not with the sharpness of a knife this time, but with a weight that made him breathe a little deeper. He'd let himself be vulnerable. He'd let her see the ugliest parts of his fear. And she didn't run. She didn't panic. She didn't judge. She simply held him like she believed he was safe in her arms, even when he didn't feel safe in his own mind. He looked down at her. She was curled into him, her breath warm on his skin, one hand resting lightly on his shirt as if making sure he didn't disappear overnight. Her face looked softer in sleep, almost younger, innocent in a way life didn't often allow her to be when awake. He traced her hairline with his eyes, not touching, just observing, memorizing the stillness of the moment. He didn't know how long he watched her before she stirred. Her lashes fluttered, her brow tightened for a second as if chasing a dream she wasn't ready to leave, and then her eyes opened. She blinked, adjusting to the morning light, and when her gaze found his, she smiled, small, slow, warm. "Morning," she whispered, voice still thick with sleep. He brushed his thumb across her shoulder. "Morning." She studied his face like she was searching for cracks, checking whether the storm had returned. He knew she was doing it unconsciously, out of care, not suspicion. He offered a small smile to ease her worry. "You slept?" she asked. "Eventually." She shifted up slightly, resting her chin on his chest so she could look at him properly. "How do you feel now?" He considered the question carefully. "Lighter. Still processing. But better." She nodded, relief softening her features. "That's enough for today." They stayed in bed longer than usual, neither of them rushing to get up, both of them listening to each other breathe. It wasn't laziness, it was recovery. The kind of quiet where healing happens in small, unnoticed moments. When they finally got out of bed, the apartment felt different. Not changed, just gentler. She moved quietly through the kitchen, hair messy, oversized t-shirt brushing her thighs as she poured water into the kettle. He leaned against the counter, watching her silently, feeling something inside him settle. "You're staring," she said without turning around. "I know." "Why?" "Because you make things easier to carry." She paused, her back still to him, and he saw the way her shoulders rose and fell with that soft breath she always took when she was trying not to get emotional too quickly. When she turned around, her eyes were glossier than before. "You don't have to say things like that if you don't mean them." "But I do," he replied. "Last night could have gone very differently. You handled me better than I handled myself." She set the kettle down and came to stand in front of him, her hands sliding around his waist as she leaned her forehead against his chest. "You don't need handling," she murmured. "You just needed space to break a little." "I don't like breaking." "You're human. Not a fortress." "Still feels like failure." "It isn't." He exhaled, long and slow, his lips brushing the top of her head as he held her closer. She wasn't trying to fix him, that was the thing she understood better than anyone. She just stayed, steady and patient, until he could find himself again. After breakfast he suggested they step out for some air. She agreed without hesitation, slipping her hand into his as they walked through the building's hallway. Outside, Accra was already awake, car horns, distant music, the scent of pastries from a vendor on the corner, the sun warming the city like it had been waiting to do so all night. They walked without a destination. He let her talk about small things, A funny video her friend sent, her annoyance at the laundry basket she kept meaning to empty, the random thought she had about repainting the living room. Her voice filled the spaces that might have otherwise been taken over by anxious thoughts. And whenever she noticed he drifted into silence too long, she squeezed his hand gently, bringing him back. At some point he stopped walking. She stopped too, looking up at him. There was something in his eyes, not pain, not fear, just sincerity laced with vulnerability. "I wasn't disappearing last night," he said softly. "I just didn't know how to feel everything at once." "I know. I don't ever want you to think I'm running from you." "I don't," she replied. "You came back." He nodded, his jaw tightening slightly as the emotion rose again. "I always will." She stepped closer until her forehead rested against his. People moved around them, cars passed, the world continued, but in that moment the street felt quiet. "You don't owe me perfection," she whispered. "Just honesty. That's what scares me." "Why?" "Because when I'm honest, you'll see all the things I don't like about myself." "Good," she said, lifting his chin so he met her eyes. "Then I'll know the real you. Not the version you think you have to be." He swallowed, overcome by the simplicity and depth of her acceptance. It felt like standing naked in front of someone and realizing they saw beauty where he saw scars. They resumed walking, slower this time, fingers interlocked. She stopped at a vendor selling coconuts and insisted they get two. He watched her argue playfully about the price, watched the way her face lit up when she won the negotiation, watched her sip the coconut water like it was the best thing she'd tasted in weeks. He realized something then: he loved her. Not in the casual, everyday way. Not in the easy, predictable way. He loved her deeply, quietly, intensely. In the way that made him want to be better. In the way that made him afraid of losing her. In the way that made last night feel like the beginning of something instead of a breaking point. On the walk back, he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She rested her head against him, content, unaware of the storm he was finally learning how to calm. When they reached the apartment, she kicked off her shoes and dropped onto the couch with a sigh. He joined her, pulling her into his lap. She curled into him naturally, like she belonged there, and maybe she did. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," he said, kissing her temple, "I focus on not shutting you out. And I focus on not panicking when you need space. We'll figure it out? We'll figure it out." He tightened his arms around her. For the first time since the previous night, he felt steady again. Not because the world had changed, but because he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. "Stay with me," he whispered. "I'm right here." And she was. And he finally believed she would be. He didn't know when he got used to the sound of her voice filling his spaces, but it happened quietly, like water soaking into sand. Days started blending into each other in a warm, steady way, shared breakfasts, small arguments about whether she should work less, nights falling asleep with her hair brushing his shoulder. She had become a constant, but not the kind that demanded anything. She was simply there, weaving herself into the rhythm of his life until he stopped remembering what the silence before her felt like. But comfort has a strange way of waking old fears. It started subtly. A long stare at his phone before answering. Moments when he drifted off during conversations. Times he touched her a little tighter, like he needed reassurance she wasn't fading. She noticed everything. One evening, they sat on his balcony overlooking the city, the heat softened by the breeze carrying the smell of roasted corn from a vendor down the street. She sat cross-legged beside him, her head resting on his arm while she scrolled through her phone. He wasn't distracted by his work for once. He was distracted by her. By the presence she brought. By the unspoken question beating in his chest. What if he didn't deserve something this steady? She nudged him gently. "You're thinking again." "I do that," he murmured. "Too much," she corrected, turning to face him. "Talk to me." He hesitated. The old instinct, stay silent, handle it alone, protect her from your storms, crept in again. But he remembered the last time he did that. The way his silence twisted into fear, her fear into distance, and everything nearly cracked. He forced himself to speak. "I keep wondering how long this peace will last." She didn't laugh. She didn't brush it off. She didn't tell him he was being dramatic. Instead, she leaned forward, taking his hand in both of hers. "Why do you think it won't?" "Because things like this don't stay." "They do," she said softly, "when two people choose to keep it." He looked out at Accra, the glittering lights, the scattered sounds of life below, and breathed slowly. She squeezed his hand again, anchoring him. "Let yourself have something good," she whispered. He nodded, even though the fear didn't vanish. But he was trying. And she saw the effort. Later that night she fell asleep before him. Her breathing was soft, steady, unbothered by the heaviness he still carried. He held her gently, watching the rise and fall of her chest, wondering if love always felt this frightening when it was real. Wondering if healing meant learning to stay even when the old fear whispered you weren't meant for happiness. Around midnight his phone buzzed. A message from his board chairman. He didn't open it immediately, he didn't want anything work-related piercing this fragile calm, but after the third buzz he slipped out of bed and stepped into the living room. A new crisis at the company. A leak in the media. A rumor about his personal life, his relationship with the woman frequently seen entering the CEO's residence. His stomach tightened. They would drag her into it. The headlines. The social media whispers. The unnecessary speculation. The unpleasantness she never asked for. She didn't deserve any of it. She didn't even know half the pressure that came with his world. He sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, feeling the weight build again. He had promised her honesty. He couldn't keep this from her. But he hated the thought of hurting her with truths she never asked for. He didn't return to bed immediately. He needed a moment to breathe before he told her. When he finally lay beside her again, she shifted instinctively, seeking him even in sleep. Her hand found his chest, resting over his heart, and something inside him softened painfully. He kissed her forehead. The next morning he told her. She didn't react the way he expected. No panic. No dramatic questions. No insecurity. She sat beside him at the dining table, sipping her tea slowly as he explained the situation. The leak, the speculation, the inevitable attention. When he finished, she put her cup down and looked at him. "Okay," she said simply. "That's it?" he asked. "What do you want me to say? That I'm running away?" "No," he admitted. "But I just want to make sure you're not overwhelmed." "I'm not," she replied. "People will always talk. They talk even when nothing is happening. But you're worth staying for. So I'm here." He couldn't speak for a moment. He hadn't expected her calmness. He hadn't expected her strength. She leaned forward, brushing her thumb across his jaw. "We'll handle it together," she said. That word. Together. It settled in him like something sacred. Hours later, she followed him to the office, not because he asked, but because she refused to let him face the board alone after such a long night. She sat quietly in his meeting room, reading a book while he addressed the board's concerns. When the members tried to call the relationship a distraction, he stopped them sharply. "My personal life is not up for debate," he said. "And neither is the woman in it." He didn't look at her when he said it, but he felt her attention soften in his direction. After the meeting, when they stepped into the car, she touched his arm gently. "You didn't have to defend me like that." "I wasn't defending you," he replied. "I was setting boundaries." She smiled, small and warm. "Still, thank you." He intertwined his fingers with hers. "You don't need to thank me for protecting what matters." In the car ride back, she leaned her head on his shoulder, and he let out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. So much had changed between them in such a short time. His walls, his fears, the way he looked for her in rooms even when he wasn't aware of it. When they got home, she cooked dinner, fried plantain, grilled chicken, and a stew that filled the apartment with the kind of scent that made a place feel lived in. He watched her move around the kitchen, humming quietly, completely at ease despite the storm around them. He joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She laughed, leaning into him. "You're distracting me." "I know." Since he rarely showed affection so openly, she softened immediately, resting her hands on his. "You're doing better today," she whispered. "Because you're here." She turned in his arms, touching his face lightly. "I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her deeply then, slow and steady, not rushed, not frantic. A kiss that felt like gratitude, fear, longing, and truth woven into one. That night, as they lay in bed with the city lights flickering against the curtains, he finally said what had been becoming truer every day. "I'm falling for you," he whispered into the darkness. She froze slightly, then shifted closer, her voice barely audible. "I know. You do. I've seen it. In the way you look at me. In the way you hold me. In the way you're trying. Does it scare you?" "A little," she admitted. "But not enough to stop me." He slid his hand down her back slowly, pulling her into him until there was no space left to fear. "I'm afraid because I've never felt something that feels this real." "Then we'll take it slow," she murmured. "And we'll learn it together." He kissed her shoulder, breathing her in, anchoring himself. For the first time in years, love didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a home he had finally returned to. He woke to the sound of distant traffic and the soft hum of the ceiling fan. The sun had barely broken through the clouds, casting a warm, golden haze across the room. Amma was still asleep beside him, her breathing slow and steady, Kojo curled up against her side. For a moment he just watched them, the small family unit that had somehow formed so quickly. He couldn't remember ever feeling such a complicated mixture of relief, awe, and fear all at once. He wanted to protect them, hold them close, and somehow he also wanted to disappear entirely, the contradictions of his heart spinning faster than he could process. He shifted carefully, not wanting to wake her. As he swung his legs off the bed, he felt the familiar pull of the day ahead: work, meetings, decisions, and the endless pressure of running a company that never rested. But today the usual drive to control everything, to plan, to execute, felt hollow. Nothing mattered as much as Amma and her son right now. The thought alone made him both stronger and more vulnerable at the same time. He moved quietly through the apartment, grabbing a glass of water, leaning against the kitchen counter as he listened to the faint sounds of life outside. Accra was waking up, the city stretching, breathing, and he realized that he too was stretching, though he didn't know what that meant yet. He wanted to call her, to check if she was awake, to hear her voice and make sure everything was truly fine. But he resisted, letting her rest, letting himself admire her patience. When she finally stirred, the look on her face was one of slight confusion, still edged with sleepiness. She smiled faintly at him and he felt something loosen in his chest. "Morning," she whispered, her voice still thick with dreams. "Morning," he replied. He moved closer, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The simple gesture felt monumental, loaded with unspoken care and unacknowledged longing. She didn't comment, she just leaned into the touch, letting the small intimacy settle between them. Breakfast was quiet. They ate together at the small dining table, the world outside beginning its noisy chaos. Amma tried to keep conversation light, sharing little observations about the morning, the way Kojo had woken up early, and the distant shouting of street vendors. He listened, half focused on her words, half focused on her presence. He noticed how her hair fell over her shoulder, how she moved her hands when she spoke, the faint crease in her brow when she concentrated on her food. Every detail burned into him, every gesture claiming a part of his attention he wasn't used to giving anyone. After breakfast, she suggested they take Kojo for a short walk to the nearby park. The idea of leaving the apartment, of exposing themselves to the eyes of the world, made him uneasy. He had always controlled who entered his life, who saw him in private, and the thought of letting them into public spaces was uncomfortable. But he didn't say no. Instead, he followed her lead, watching as she adjusted her son in his stroller with a deft, natural skill that made him realize she was capable of more than he had ever assumed. The park was quiet at this hour, mostly mothers with children and a few men jogging in rhythm with the city's pulse. Kojo's laughter, light and spontaneous, was a sound he had grown to love. Amma's gaze followed him constantly, soft and vigilant, protective without being overbearing. He felt a pang of admiration, not just for her motherhood but for the way she moved through life carrying both vulnerability and resilience at once. He had seen her in stress, in fear, in the hospital last week, and now he saw her in calm, in joy, in ordinary moments. Each version of her unsettled him and captivated him in equal measure. As they walked, she spoke about Kojo's school, her hopes for him, the little challenges she faced managing time between work and his needs. He listened, learning things he hadn't thought to ask before. He realized that despite his wealth and his power, there were things he could never fully understand. The constant balancing act of a single mother, the fear of not having enough, the quiet sacrifices no one noticed. He thought about how often he had been insulated from these realities, how easily he could have ignored her struggles if he had been less attuned to the kind of life she led. He found himself talking more than he expected. Not about work, not about strategy or numbers, but about his own childhood, the loss of his parents, the loneliness that came with wealth and expectation. Amma listened without judgment, offering small nods, soft murmurs of acknowledgement, and sometimes silence, which felt more comforting than words. He realized that she had a way of making him feel safe and exposing truths he had spent decades hiding. By mid-morning, the park was busier, the sun higher, casting harsh light on everything. They sat on a bench under the shade of a tall tree, Kojo playing with a ball at their feet. He noticed how naturally she smiled at him when she watched her son, the way her eyes softened, and he felt a deep, unfamiliar pull in his chest. This was no longer about mere attraction. It was something more potent, more terrifying. "I never thanked you properly," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. He turned to her, surprised. "For what?" "For last week, For saving Kojo, for standing by me. I know I said it, but I never really meant it enough. You don't need to, he said. His voice was low, firm, but his heart thumped. You did what you had to do. I just happened to be there. You could have ignored it, she pressed gently. You didn't. You didn't just save him. You stayed. You made sure we were okay. Not everyone would have. Her words struck him in ways no business deal or calculated strategy ever had. They cut past the polished exterior, past the wealth and the control, into the raw center of who he was. He looked down at his hands, unsure how to respond. What could he say that wouldn't sound hollow? How could he explain the storm of emotions she had stirred in him without frightening her away? I didn't think, he said finally, choosing honesty over eloquence. I didn't think I'd care this much. But I do. Her gaze softened. She reached out, lightly touching his arm. I know. The simplicity of that statement, I know, carried more weight than he could have imagined. It acknowledged the bond forming between them without pushing it into words that might have frightened him. It gave him permission to feel, to let go of control, to start navigating a relationship he had never been prepared for. They returned to the apartment in the afternoon, Kojo tired and napping in his stroller. He watched Amma carry him inside, her movements careful, almost reverent. He realized again how much he wanted to protect her, not from him but from the pressures of the world that had already tried to crush her spirit. That evening he made dinner with her, the first time he had cooked for someone other than himself. It was simple, rice, grilled fish and vegetables, but the act felt monumental. They worked together in the kitchen, sharing small smiles, brief touches, and laughter that felt entirely unforced. He realized he had never shared a space with someone in such a normal human way, and it was intoxicating. After dinner they sat on the balcony again, Kojo asleep in the room, the city sprawling below them. They spoke quietly about trivial things, nothing significant, yet everything felt significant because they were together. He noticed how easily she made him laugh, how her laughter softened the sharp edges of his mind, how her presence filled gaps he hadn't even realized existed. Later, as night fell, they lay together in bed, silent at first. He traced patterns on her arm, each stroke a promise he wasn't sure how to articulate yet. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. She just let him be present, allowed him to navigate the complicated terrain of his emotions without judgment. I'm not used to this, he admitted quietly, staring at the ceiling. Not being alone in my thoughts, not carrying everything myself. You don't have to be, she murmured. Not with me. He felt a weight lift from him. Not all of it, not entirely, but enough that he could sleep without the tightness in his chest that had become his constant companion. He realized as sleep claimed him, that life had shifted irrevocably. Amma had entered his world, uninvited by his plans but essential nonetheless. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring or the days after, or how the world would react to their growing closeness. But he knew one thing clearly, he would not let her slip away, and he would not allow the world to dictate the terms of their bond. For the first time in a long time he felt a sense of clarity in chaos. And he held on to it tightly, knowing that this was only the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted, yet both were beginning to embrace. The day started quietly but the calm didn't last. He woke to the sound of Kojo calling from the other room, his small voice carrying both impatience and excitement. Amma was already awake, moving with a gentle efficiency that made him marvel again at her strength. She handed him a cup of tea without a word, just a look that said, "Drink this, steady yourself." He watched her, noticing the small details again, the curve of her smile as she encouraged Kojo to get dressed, the way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the way she somehow carried both authority and warmth in one movement. He was no stranger to beauty or grace, but this felt different. Rooted. Real. Not the polished perfection he saw in the socialite events or the boardroom. Over breakfast they talked about Kojo's school. She explained a new schedule, activities he had joined, and small worries that didn't seem to faze her outwardly but he could hear in the soft lilt of her voice. He listened carefully, offering suggestions sparingly, feeling both included and secondary at the same time. He wasn't used to stepping back, to letting someone else's life take the lead, but with Amma, it felt necessary. Natural even. Later they ventured out to run errands. He followed her down the streets of Accra, noticing how she navigated familiar paths with ease. Shopkeepers greeted her warmly, neighbors waved, she exchanged small pleasantries with a few parents. He realized she was connected in ways he could never be. She belonged to this life fully, not just to him. And it struck him, he was the outsider. The wealthy man watching her world from the edges. Yet he didn't mind. He wanted to watch. You wanted to learn. You wanted to belong. Kojo held her hand tightly and she let him. He couldn't help but smile at the simple scene. She looked down at her son, face soft with affection, and for a moment, the weight of responsibility didn't feel like a burden. It felt like something sacred. When they returned home, a letter had been delivered to the apartment. Thick, official-looking, the kind that made his stomach sink before he even read it. He opened it carefully and scanned the pages. His company was under scrutiny again, a small scandal meant to attract attention to a decision he had made last quarter. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to create noise, enough to disrupt the fragile calm he had been building with Amma. He placed the letter down and took a deep breath. He didn't tell her immediately. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he needed to process. Amma noticed his sudden tension anyway, the way his jaw tightened, the way his fingers drummed on the table. "You're thinking again," she said softly, not accusing, just observing. "Yes," he admitted. "About work. About everything." "You'll handle it," she replied simply. Her confidence in him, quiet and unwavering, was like a lifeline. "Like you always do." "I don't always," he murmured. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Then we handle it together." It was just a phrase, simple and unremarkable, but it resonated in him. Together. Not alone. Not hidden behind walls of control and isolation. Together. By late afternoon he realized that Amma had been right. Sitting with her in the living room, listening to her suggestions about how to manage the situation, he felt a clarity he hadn't felt in months. She wasn't just a passive observer, she was a partner in ways he hadn't expected. She asked questions, offered insights, and her perspective reminded him why he had let her into his life in the first place. After Kojo's nap, they sat in the balcony again. The city had begun to settle into evening rhythms. The hum of cars, the faint music from a nearby street, the aroma of grilled street food drifting up. Amma rested her head on his shoulder, and he felt a weight lift, not of responsibilities but of fear. The fear of being overwhelmed by life, by work, by feelings he didn't understand yet. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly, more to himself than to her. "Not of you. Not of us. Just life. Everything I can't control." She turned to him, her eyes steady and gentle. "You don't have to control everything. You just have to be present." He wanted to argue, he wanted to assert that control was safety, but he couldn't. She was right. Being present, fully present, was harder than he realized. Yet for the first time he felt like he could try. Night came. Kojo was asleep, tucked into bed with Amma by his side. He watched them from the doorway, the quiet intimacy of mother and child striking him with a force he hadn't anticipated. He knew he wanted that, wanted them in his life, wanted to be someone they could depend on, wanted to create a space where safety and love were constants, not luxuries. Amma noticed him standing there. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to convey understanding, acceptance, and reassurance. He moved toward her, sitting gently beside her on the couch. They talked in whispers about trivial things, about hopes, about fears, about laughter and memories. Eventually he dared to ask, "Amma, have you ever felt like someone just completes a space in your life?" She looked at him, tilting her head slightly. "Yes," she said softly. "And I think I found it." The word struck him like lightning. He hadn't expected to hear it, and yet he felt relief, fear, and joy all at once. He reached for her hand, intertwining fingers, feeling the warmth and reassurance radiate between them. Days passed, each one blending into the next. Work was still demanding, the board still scrutinizing, and rumors still whispered through social channels. But with Amma and Kojo in his life, the world's noise felt less threatening. He found himself laughing more, sleeping more deeply, thinking less about every small detail and more about the larger picture. Family, connection, love. One evening, as they sat on the balcony eating fresh mangoes, Kojo between them, she looked at him with an intensity that made him pause mid-bite. "Do you really want this?" she asked. "With us?" He swallowed, not because of the fruit, but because the question was heavier than he expected. "Yes," he said finally, voice firm. "I do. More than I can explain." Her hand found his cheek. "Then we'll figure it out," she whispered. "Together." He kissed her forehead gently, feeling the fragile solidity of their bond. They watched Kojo play with a stick on the balcony floor, his laughter echoing into the night, and he realized something profound. The moments that seemed ordinary were, in fact, extraordinary. Love, trust, and family weren't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. They were about showing up, standing together, and holding on to each other through the chaos. That night, as he lay beside Amma in the quiet dark, He felt a deep sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in decades. Not to money, not to power, not to the accolades or the company, but to life itself. He had found something unshakable, a family formed not by blood alone but by choice, care and courage. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know the challenges they would face, the mistakes they would make, or the external pressures that would test them. But he knew one thing: for the first time he wasn't afraid to face them. Not alone and not without her. As sleep finally claimed him, he held her hand, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his palm. It was a rhythm that promised resilience, connection, and hope. He closed his eyes, letting the city fade, letting the worries fade, letting the certainty of this moment anchor him. Part 1 ended not with fanfare, not with resolution, but with quiet certainty. He had chosen to be present, to be vulnerable, to care fully. And she had chosen the same. Whatever came next, they would face it together.